So in reclassification, this has become a more common way of looking at how a new test is added to current clinical practice. To ask, does it add value? It's especially useful in results where you have indeterminate or intermediate results from a first test, and ask, does the second test add to that? You can look at this either at what fraction of patients are reclassified correctly, or in a more stringent approach, what the net reclassification improvement is. This has been used, for example, with HSCRP adding to Framingham risk, where it does reclassify significantly, even though it does not improve the C statistic or area under an ROC curve. So there are a fair number of numbers on this slide, and I'll just take you through it briefly. What we've shown here along the top is for all patients looking at Diamond-Forrester low, intermediate, and high risk, what fraction of them, the numbers in parentheses, have obstructive disease. So you can see at low risk, all the patients, there's 22% likelihood of having obstructive disease in this cohort, and at high risk, it's 51. Now, if you look in the columns where you take each clinical risk factor defined by Diamond-Forrester, and you then stratify by the algorithm score, low, medium, and high risk, what you can see is in every case, the higher the algorithm score is, independent of the clinical defined pretest probability, the probability of having obstructive disease, if you took this person to the cath lab, increases. If you look specifically at the intermediate risk group, what you can see is that if the algorithm score is low, there's only a 25% likelihood of having obstructive disease, whereas if it's high, it's over 50%. In the case of low Diamond-Forrester pretest probability, and you have a high algorithm score, 70% of those patients, though it's a small fraction overall, show obstructive disease. And conversely, those patients with high pretest probability by Diamond-Forrester, if they have a low score, only 20% of those. If you look at overall statistically, this is quite significant. And when you look at the net reclassification improvement compared to the clinical factors, 20% of the patients overall are correctly classified in this analysis. One can do a similar analysis looking at myocardial perfusion imaging, and I'll just leave you with one part of this, since I think Alexandra did a nice job covering that in a gender-specific way, and that is if you look at patients who have positive MPIs and low algorithm scores, that second line on the far right, you see that only 11% of those patients who had a positive myocardial perfusion test but have a low score really have disease. It's actually, I think, even a bit stronger than that in women. And what this says is that you can rule out a lot of false positives in this case but if you have a low algorithm score. In this case, the net reclassification improvement is about 25% of patients. It's highly statistically significant. And this was the most common non-invasive test that was used in the PREDICT study.